Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Just before I get started, I want to say this is a really special day in my life, and I appreciate all of you sharing it with me here today. So let's get started. Why writers love water metaphors? Because we are born drowning, because relationships are like rivers, are like storms, are like sex, are like waves, holding breath, hot ice, the great flood. Because sweat tastes like each other. Please don't lick each other. Boundaries, people. A couple of years ago, I did a very awkward thing. I gathered up a list of everyone I knew and began sending them weekly essays on subjects that had been percolating in my mind. Deep, personal subjects. No one asked me for this, or even hinted that I should. I felt a compelling need to express myself, which I think is commonly referred to as a midlife crisis. Part of the reason for this undertaking was feeling misrepresented in culture. I'd lost a parent, had cancer twice, gotten older in a youth fetishizing society, been single post-40 for many years, owned a business, and virtually none of what I saw represented was my lived experience, especially how middle-aged women were portrayed. That we were hard, we were bitter, we were no longer useful, relevant, or funny. It made me feel oddly disconnected, not just from other people, but from myself. Was I a weirdo, an outlier? Probably. Why did it look so different from the experience that I knew? I wanted to talk about how being in treatment wasn't anything like being a warrior, and much more like being forced to run the shittiest marathon of all time with no training. I wanted to say my unvarnished truth out loud to real people without considering the consequences. It's wondering if your life matters and to whom, and what exactly has all this amounted to. I felt a palpable despair after my first diagnosis. If this can all be taken away so quickly, do I matter? Eventually, I ended up flipping that question. If this is all ephemeral, and nothing I do matters, then maybe that means it's fine to do exactly as I please. Cancer untethered me, and I liberated myself. I wrote essays. I took up photography. I wrote and performed stand-up, which sounds impressive until you realize that dick jokes just make themselves. I'm not sorry. All right. I thought hard before pulling the trigger. What if this was silly or ill-considered? What did it mean to fail at something that had no real objective? I considered what it might be like to get negative feedback, and then I remembered that I'd been reading 14 years of online reviews for my restaurant. Some of which commented on me personally, so bring it. True story, by the way, I once had a table that I was waiting on them personally. It was a large table, and the next day there were 2 reviews from that table. One of them talking about what an amazing hostess I was, how awesome I was, and the other one commenting about how horrible I was. So I already knew that people's opinions of me were personal to them and variable. So I committed to doing a year of writing, and I ended up doing about a year and a half. What I thought would happen when I started this project. So you don't know me, but I'm the sort of person who likes to imagine all the success of doing something before the actual work. Even for this speech, point by point, It was all going to be perfect. Standing ovation. No pressure though. I imagined everyone telling me what a great job I did, right up until I actually sat down to do the work. Seeing how difficult it is to create something of value is a real eye-opener. Since most of you didn't know me before today, you can assume I did not become a famous writer. What actually happened was even better. I was forced to do the work, and I got better at writing. The essays were sent in an email newsletter, and people often hit reply and rewarded me with their own stories. Most importantly, the work informed me about who I am. It illuminated parts of me I hadn't known very well, which brings me to the subject of today's talk. Using the creative flow to understand yourself. See what I did there? Notice I don't say fix, or alter, or improve, simply understand. This quote came from the theme this month about water and what a precious resource it is. But I really like this as a metaphor for our known and unknown selves. What we see and experience on a daily basis, the titles that we give ourselves, that's the 1%. The rest of it is your unknown self. And that's the part that we're addressing. When I was younger, it felt like everyone else was a mystery and I understood myself. But as I've gotten older, I've come to see that it's the reverse. We are in large part a mystery to ourselves, and that's worth trying to remedy. And we need to understand ourselves to find forgiveness, find peace, and evolve as human beings. So this is the Johari window, and if you're not familiar with it, I'll run through it quickly. It's a heuristic to help you understand yourself. And so there's what people know about you and what you know about yourself. There's what you know about yourself that other people don't know. There's what other people know about you that you don't know about yourself. And then we're tackling the mystery box, as I call it, which is what you don't know about yourself and other people don't know about you. It's this mysterious corner that is illuminated by your honest expression. The medium doesn't matter. I chose writing, but that is beside the point. Creative work is an anchor to our essential selves. The projects you are attracted to reveal a part of who you are. The work itself is a dialogue with the mystery box. It's also a way of engaging in a relationship with yourself, which is one of the most important of your life, and maybe the only one that spans the entirety of your life. If you aren't yet convinced about this relationship's importance, or even that it exists, I have a little test for you. What are you thinking about right now? Not what are you hearing from me, but what are you thinking about? An unreturned text? Your plans later on tonight? A conversation with a friend? Exactly. If the persistent dialogue in your mind is with yourself, you might as well invest in getting to know that person. As I approach 50, I've come to value that relationship more and more. No matter who loves you, there are many things you will have to face alone. Forgiveness, peace, and evolution come in very handy for those moments. So, I started writing. During painful procedures, I closed my eyes and imagined the feeling of swimming in an ocean. The cool water enveloping my skin, the effort of my body to stay afloat, the sun on my face. I wrote there about how I coped during painful moments in treatment. I wrote about buying a camper, which, by the way, I've never camped before in my life, ever before I did this trip. No matter. I bought a camper, and I had it out for 6 weeks. I didn't even know how to back up this camper, so it was an interesting endeavor. I jumped into cold springs with my snorkeling gear and swam after turtles and fish. I biked into headwinds until my legs felt like jelly. I cooked my meals in the rain and marveled at the sky full of stars. I felt big and small at the same time. That was a very beautiful moment in my life. I wrote about suddenly having panic attacks on the highway, despite the fact that I'd never had an accident or any real problem on the road. Anxiety is like a leak. You find the water in the basement, but its origin could be a crack in the roof. For a moment, they seem unrelated, but the water winds its way as it will. I wrote about feeling brokenhearted, and if there would be enough time to find the meaningful relationship I was looking for. Thankfully, there was. Before diagnosis, I held the illusion of life stretching before me. It was just a matter of time before love came my way. The reality was more sobering. I wrote about fear. One of the biggest side effects of treatment is once they're done with you, you go home with your fear. It's persistent and disorienting. Cancer consumes me. It takes my money and nourishes itself with my peace. It's a side hustle that wants to be a full-time gig. You'd think I'd be more adept by now. An expert fear wrangler. I'm nothing of the sort. Fear drags me by the foot and I squirm like a helpless insect, all legs and no power. I've had cancer twice and still don't know how to live on borrowed time. I wrote about the rah-rah culture around cancer and the cheerful face the world seems to demand. People want you to unshackle yourself from grief, soothe them with your rejection of sadness. I wrote about being a challenging and assertive woman and feeling passed over by men in my 20s. Sacrifice and the capacity to love do not live in a woman because of her passivity or lack of it. Fierce women who must be reasoned with and give their consent to plans also make great mothers. And then I began to rewrite my story to myself. I came to accept that my setbacks, my mistakes, my ill-considered decisions were nothing to be ashamed of. They are part of being alive. If you are alive, there is difficulty. Conversely, difficulty is the privilege of the living. I am alive, an imperfect privilege. And then finally here, it's not the end of the talk, but don't clap or get up, you know. There is no happy ending, only happy periods. And what we all know is that all of this comes to an end for all of us. And this quote helps me remember that when things are good and joyful, like today, to grab a hold and embrace it and feel it fully. And when things are difficult, to remember that as long as you're alive, there is another opportunity for joy. And so when things are good, I relish fully in it, and I'm happy to do so. Part of the reason that there are so many misleading or limited narratives in culture is that we need more storytellers. We need more nuance. I need to live in a world that rewards bravery over conformity. And that means I need all of you to tell your stories too. And a lot of people wonder where to get started. So I drew this, by the way, I know. It's so good. Yeah. So, artiste. But I thought it was a decent diagram to explain where I think people's stories should come from. And if you're mining yourself for stories, and the ordinary ones I think are frankly the most compelling ones, you know, but the space between your lived experience and the common narrative is where your story resides. Your perspective is the sweet spot. And some things to ask yourself are, what do people get wrong? What do you see that others don't? What subject interests you that is being passed over by everyone else? That is where the start of your story is. So now I have some tips for you, with a little assistance from Danny McBride. So cultivate an irrational belief in yourself. And I do that. And part of the reason is why not? And part of it is that a lot of your work is going to be terrible when you get going. It just is. And so what? I'm a big fan of fumbling around. I think mediocre is just fine. I think many of us here, Ira Glass said it well, that we have good taste, right? That we start being creative because we have good taste and we're inspired by other people. But it's a long time before you produce anything that looks like Ira Glass's work. In the meantime, this helps me show up. It helps me sit down and write. It helps me show up for performances. It helps me to be here today in front of you. And I do believe this wholeheartedly, that it is important. And one other thing is that you should believe that the work itself is important to you. So this one's a little tougher. My Giphy isn't there. Oh, there we go. So the way that I see it is that there's my truth, there is your truth, and there's the collective truth. And all three can be different and live together peaceably. Your own story is a personal dialogue with yourself, not a retelling of the collective truth and not a retelling of someone else's truth. And if they are ruffled by your truth, just remember they have their own to nurture. They have their own to say. There is a line between us, and there is no reason for you to diminish your story because other people have a different idea of it. In fact, I would tell you, please don't. That is not the truth. And I also use this to look at my own work as I'm writing it and really see if it sounds like the truth. Sometimes bold things come out of you, but then when you read them, you think, I don't know about this. I'm not sure if this is really accurate. So it's a good barometer to use while you're creating something. So I made this little formula because, again, going back to being a beginner, I love being a beginner, by the way. I think being a beginner is so exciting. Is that this is my formula for how to think about doing the work. So I am a bit of a ham, and I do like attention, but I think that that is not the important part. It is not at all, and it is certainly not important to developing this relationship with yourself. And frankly, your work is not going to be very good in the beginning. So, one thing that I did when I first started out was ask everyone and their brother to read my essays. And some people were nice, and they did, and other people ignored me, which was fine. And but what I came to understand was it would be a while before anything was good, and frankly, the process of doing the work teaches you a whole lot. I also like this formula for judging the truth in what I'm seeing. I think if what's being put out to you more clearly is the need for attention from someone or something, then there is very little truth in that work. So think about that when you're seeing that. Of course, advertising would be, a good example of that. But in an age where social media is so prominent, you have to think about that a little bit. And my last tip is to feel the joy. And when I was writing, as you can tell from some of the quotes, I was certainly anguished during portions of this, although I did write some funny stuff too. I just didn't pull it out for today. But, but what happened was that I would sit at my dining room table and I would have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and it was quiet in my house. I do love the quiet. And I would sit there and write and make jokes to myself. I would get up and take little dance breaks, which I might still do. And that is the most intense joy I think I've had by myself. And I would tell all of you to go find that joy. I think joy is worth cultivating. I think pleasure is worth pursuing. And that joyfulness is the relationship with yourself that you are cultivating. You are being good to yourself. You are saying real things. And that brings me to the end of today's presentation. Boy, this went by really fast. I'm just going to soak up this moment. I'm going to leave you with a poem, or a portion of a poem that has been very meaningful to me. Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves.